we've avoided the subject of Joe Mixon, running back draft prospect, but it's, to me, an appalling subject that we're going to have to face because he will be drafted in this next week. So first, Peter, tell us what we're hearing about Joe Mixon. Are there teams interested in taking him?
Yeah, I think we all know the story with Joe Mixon. We know the visual. We know what that. So now what do you do the next step for his NFL career? I've spoken to just about every NFL franchise over the last week, and it is interesting. Some teams say he's completely off our board. We would never stand for something like that. Other teams say, well, we heard him out. We met with him. He had an apology. He had a story, and we are willing to take him if it is the right time in the draft. So first-round talent, no one questions that. But then we get to Friday, day 2. If he's not on the board after that, second round, when you start getting to the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, you have to weigh public reaction to this. You have to weigh what you stand for as a team and what your owner has an appetite for. Am I willing to bring this guy into my organization? Mixon has done and said all the right things in the past few months to these teams. But when the time is right and the clock is on, which team is going to take him? Some have already told me he is off their boards. And I want to turn to the ex-players here real quick. Start with you, Smitty. Yep. A team drafts, say you're a veteran on a team drafts Joe Mixon. What's your initial response in that locker room as a veteran player?
Veteran player, young player, new player. All these guys have an opinion, whether you like them or not. You have the coach who has to take the temperature of the team, and then he's also the G. And then you have the GM. The GM is the middle guy, the fire department between the owner and the coach. Right. Then as players, you have your opinion. Some players like myself have had things that happen to them that have shaped and molded them to where there are certain things that they like that they can deal with, and there are certain things that they don't like and they don't want to deal with it. I think you're going to have players who don't want to deal with him, who he has to earn their respect, and he also is going to be on a very short leash and that is the consequences of his actions. Right. That is not, I think I'm better. I've had my own issues. But just because I've had my own issues as a father, I still have my opinion. Right. And based off the way I raise my children and what I think is deemed valuable and invaluable, if I was on a team, I would be very quiet and I would limit my conversations because that's what I choose to do. Right. I wouldn't disrespect him. I wouldn't put him down, but I would not glance over it and act like it didn't happen and not possibly have a conversation. Some people may say on Twitter right now, say, well, did you have a conversation with this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy? Right. Yes, I did. But what and how is none of your business. The conversations that I had with them were based on how I felt, and that's how I'll stick with it. But at the end of the day, he made a decision and he did something that has a consequence, and if he continues to go down that path, just like anybody else with something else, it will hurt him and eventually get him unemployed.
You know, you made a good point about how individuals are raised and how they're shaped growing up. I grew up in a household with my mother and father. I never saw my dad put my hands on my mother. I'm married. I have a wife. I have a daughter. So I teach and live my way the same way. Now, when you hear about individuals that have assault charges, domestic violence, it always raises an eyebrow for me. But then I go back to thinking about any individual that comes into locker rooms that might have a different issue. It's not necessarily assault. It's not domestic violence, but there's other things that we have to forgive. And I'm not trying to make this a sermon, but it is about forgiveness and faith. It's about seeing a guy walk in the locker room, knowing exactly what his history is, seeing it blasted all over the news, saying, all right, as a teammate, I'm willing to forgive him. I don't need to be his friend as a man, but as a teammate, I'm willing to forgive him. And then I say faith because now you got to have faith that he's going to do right. Because what's the point of forgiving somebody if you know that they're going to turn around and make mistakes that's going to hurt the team? We've been there before. You've seen a guy stand up in front of the locker room, stand up in front of the meeting room and say, hey, guys, my bad. You know what? I'm going to do right. I'm going to move forward. I'm not going to make the same mistake again. And then they make the same mistake again. So where he lands is going to be about forgiveness and faith. And that starts with the owner, the GM, coaching staff, and then that locker room, which is his most important ally within this whole thing, because it's not about, I think if a team wants a player and they think he's going to be productive, they're fine with it. The concern is, how is that guy going to be received in the locker room? Because if he doesn't have the locker room, he's not going to
Not
last.
all owners are going to
Not every team's fine with it. A lot of teams aren't. I wouldn't want him on my board.
I said if a team is going to be fine with it and think he's going to be productive. I'm not saying that.
No, of course. The interesting part about it is, though, that some teams are going to be able to forgive and have faith. Other teams, before even meeting the kid, are like, he's off our board.
Kate, I have some thoughts on this, too. As the only woman here at the table and as someone who's very opinionated, I'd like to hear what you think.
I mean, I'm looking at it from a fan perspective. I guess you're going to have your fans that are going to say, oh, eventually take him. He's a value. He'll go out there and crush it, and they'll maybe get on board. We've seen similar things in the past. You can't watch that video and root for this player. I will never be able to root for this player or support him, and even if he's on my home team that I bleed for and spend all of my savings on season tickets for. I think that having him on a draft board and taking him sort of perpetuates a culture of domestic violence. You can say what you want. It's a real problem. And if you look at it from a less trivial perspective, there's a ton of depth at the running back spot. Just don't bother. Don't let's change the narrative a little bit, or it's going to keep going. And I'm not okay with it. And I can't root for him. I think, and it's he cannot control his anger. That's what I saw in that video. It's not bad judgment as a kid in 2014. Bad judgment is staying up all night binge watching Breaking Bad and failing to show up at a midterm. That's bad judgment. This is not. This is a way more serious issue.
I agree with you 100%, and I believe that zero tolerance in the league, it should be implemented when it comes to domestic violence. But let me play devil's advocate. I'm just saying there's going to be a guy in one of these front offices, and he says, hey, this is 2 years ago. He was in college. He was probably intoxicated. He made a mistake.
Apologized 2 years later.
He apologized. All these things. He hasn't had an issue since. He's been an upstanding citizen. He's done the right thing in college. And I've talked to this young man. I've seen the tears roll down his face. And I feel like he has learned his lesson, and he will not have a mistake like this again. And let me take it a step further. And then I'll give you an example of guys that had issues in college and were absolute pros. So what do you say to that argument? Because people will have that. And you've seen those guys.
Well,
right?
You also seen a guy like Lawrence Phillips, who showed that he had all the potential in the world, could have been probably one of the best running backs ever, who
continued to spiral
down to the fact of where he died in jail.
Yeah.
There are examples on both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
It just depends on where you lie and what you're okay with doing.
In the individual we're talking about.
Individual. And for me, I am not. If I'm that guy, I am not. And some people say, well, I don't have a clean slate.
Right.
But there are some things I just can't fool with.
Sure. Tolerate.
And that's me. And you can say, well, of course.
That's all of us here.
Yes, that's just me. Right. My threshold, my pain threshold for different things are what it is.
Yeah.
And whether you like it or not, unfortunately, that's why NFL Network has me here.
Yeah.
And you're on the other side.
Yeah. How would you think?
I think the biggest name attached to Joe Mixon right now is Tyreek Hill. And he's doing this year after Tyreek Hill came into the league. And I think the Chiefs set a blueprint. They take him late. The GM comes out. He says, oh, we've done our due diligence. You have to meet him. He's very remorseful. Then they sign him with this contract with $70,000, spread it over the year. They can cut him at any time. Tyreek Hill was an incredible player. I think someone is going to take Joe Mixon higher than we think, because I think a lot of people are wishing they had taken Tyreek Hill. They saw what he did to the league, and I think they should. Because, listen, I have 3 sisters. I have a daughter. I sit next to Kay every single day. This is an unbelievable football player.
Yes, he is.
The Milwaukee Journal-Sun, I'm quoting an executive saying he's the best player in the draft. If we don't take him, someone else is going to take him. They're going to beat us with him. We're going to lose games. We're going to lose jobs. The fans don't win. That is our business. We're going to move on. We're going to do this. We're going to follow the Chiefs blueprint, and we're going to take one hell of a player. Past be damned. I think that's going to happen.
Can't root for him, though, like fan perspective.
I wouldn't buy his jersey. I wouldn't have him on my fantasy team, that type of thing. But if I'm in a front office and I do the research, look, Reggie McKenzie's already come out and said he's a really good kid. We met with him. They're doing it. Someone's going to take this guy because he's awesome. I wouldn't buy his jersey, but if I'm in the front office and I met with him, I would draft him.
Now, the league has a very, very strong stance on domestic violence. In fact, they were so strong, they didn't invite him to the combine.
I was going to say, how did that affect him? Because it seems like then teams spent more time with him privately.
And they had to fly into Norman, Oklahoma, instead of just getting a 15-minute meeting there in Indianapolis. They're paying their own money. They're going to meet with him. He's been to a lot of facilities. He's saying and doing all the right things. The question is, as a franchise, as an organization, in today's day and age, are you willing, and what's your appetite for risk? If it does go wrong and something does occur, knock on wood.
That's on you.
You took this kid knowing what was on it. And the difference between Tyreek Hill, and I've talked to a lot of executives, the video.
It's everything.
Whether it's true or not that it should have
everything.
The video. It is the visual evidence. and that will roll. Whatever team drafts him.
There was no Greg Hardy video.
That local news is going to play that night he gets drafted.
I'll just say this, and we'll close it out with this. I say as an organization, if the guy does make the same mistake again, that you raise your hand and say, I messed up. Because I don't see, we don't hear that often. It's always the player. Oh, the player messed up. Let's move on. No, as an organization, you took him. But you don't need to root for him. But if he does do right and he does keep his nose clean, just say a tip of the hat. You don't have to buy his jersey, but say, okay, we see that you have made changes in your life. Because, second chances come often. And it's not just in football, it's in life. So we'll just see what happens. But it is an interesting storyline coming up here in the